Hero Time, Chapter 6, Explanations. The drive to the safe house was silent. Jen was looking out the window the whole time, looking like she was counting streets. She frowned slightly when they turned into the center of Bellwood. The safe house is downtown? Varaxi nodded. I believe the Magister's words were hidden in plain sight. Jen nodded, her heart sinking as she thought of the Forever Knights hiding out in a literal castle. There does seem to be some merit in the idea, yes. Al said, glancing over at Jen. She had fallen silent again. She was wondering if this cute, admittedly alien, boy had given her flowers because he liked her, or because of the Omnitrix. Though when they'd met, she hadn't been wearing it at all. She shook her head as they pulled into a parking garage. They had to enter a code at the entrance. It was attached to a rather nice apartment building. They entered the building and the elevator before there was any more security. Varaxi slipped a key into the elevator and a panel slipped back. Varaxi put her hand on the keypad. Albraxix followed suit. Jen frowned and stepped forward. She tapped the Omnitrix to the pad. It flashed green and the elevator went down. Albraxix glanced at the Omnitrix. Magister Highbreeds' plumber badge did that too. It remains blue with her. Jen nodded. Yeah, the Omnitrix got added to the plumber database a long time ago. Good to know it never got removed. Albraxix nodded. They arrived at the safe house and had to scan in again. May I offer you a beverage? Jen shook her head. No thanks. You now have half an hour to tell me what's going on here. Varaxi took a seat by the window, which, despite them being underground, showed a view of the street outside. As I have said, my true name is Albraxix. We are from a planet called Apollo 1. We are Apollonites. We are a peaceful race, similar to Earth, though we are a level 5 on the plumber's technology scale. Jen nodded. Planet Earth was only level 2. Of course, the Omnitrix sort of broke that scale, but she could contemplate that later. There have been threats against our world by the Incursion Empire. I was sent off-world as a safety measure. There was suspicion of a spy at home. Jen nodded, then frowned. She was familiar with the Incursions, an empirical race of frog-like humanoids. They had a rather large armada, if memory served, but that wasn't what was making her frown. Why you? Al had removed his ID mask again and blushed. It wasn't like a human's blush, though, where the blood rushing to the face colored the cheeks. Instead, the bright violet star-like freckles grew even brighter. I am the youngest son of King Albraxion and Queen Yaraxi. Though I am not in direct line for the throne, I would make a valuable hostage should the situation escalate to violence. Jen blinked at him incredulously. You're a prince? He nodded. Varaxi stood from her spot by the window and stepped over to a small cabinet. She pulled out a datapad. We have all of our visas and passports in order. Jen skimmed through them, mostly for show. It was all in alien writing. They must have been vetted by the Magister already. She set the datapad down on the table. All right, I believe you. She stood, Varaxi collecting the datapad. Jen sighed and picked up her bag, trying to ignore the sunflowers poking out of the top. Let me talk to my team. You picked a bad time to come to Earth. Al frowned. How so? There's something big going down. I'm not sure how big it is yet, but it's what got Magister Highbreeds killed. She thought for a moment, then spoke to Varaxi. She seemed to be the more experienced of the two. Have you ever heard of a species called the DNAliens? The woman shook her head. Jen nodded. For now, I would say go about business as usual. Keep a low profile. Al stood and stepped up to her. If, as you say, something big is going down, I wish to be of assistance. Jen paused, just considering it, so Al went on. Apollonites are adept healers and skilled marksmen. Varaxi stepped forward, looking at Albraxix with steely blue eyes. I would advise against this. Your parents sent you here for your safety, not so you could get caught up in someone else's war. But Varaxi's right. Jen nodded. I can't ask that of you. Thank you for the offer, but no. It's important to your people that you stay safe. You have to think about them first. Varaxi bowed to Jen. Thank you, Specialist Tennyson. Jen blinked at the form of address, but let it slide without comment. No problem. She turned to the door, and Albraxix stepped up next to her, slipping on his ID mask. Jen raised an eyebrow at him. It is polite to walk a guest out, especially one as beautiful as you. Jen blushed bright red. Is it normal for humans to change color? Varaxi frowned, following close behind them. Jen figured she had to be Albraxix's bodyguard. The human buried her head in her hands for a moment, then nodded. Sometimes, yes. It's an emotional response thing. Though sometimes when people get sick, their faces change colors, like getting paler or even slightly green. Al looked contemplative as they entered the elevator. What emotional response did my words elicit? He sounded almost hopeful. Jen let out a long breath. She had to keep in mind that these two aliens didn't seem to know a lot about humans or Earth society. Embarrassment. There was a very pregnant pause. Jen ran a hand through her hair. It just sounded like you were flirting with me. I don't get that a lot. They had arrived at the lobby of the building, and Jen stepped out the front doors before Al collected his thoughts and caught up with her. He gently took her hand, the one without the Omnitrix, and kissed the back of it. I assure you, I was attempting to engage in flirtation with you. If you will allow me, I would like to do so again. Jen was the shade of a tomato by the time Al finished speaking. She laughed nervously. So the flowers weren't because of this? She waved her Omnitrix-covered wrist in his direction. Al shook his head. No, they were simply to make you smile. I was informed they were your favorite. Jen blinked, and Al smiled at her. Your eyes are stunning. Like Abraxian emeralds, but brighter. Jen brushed her hair out of her eyes with her free hand and smiled shyly. Thanks, I think. May I continue to engage in flirtation with you? If it makes you uncomfortable, I will cease. Jen shook her head as a familiar rumble shook the block. Yeah, you can still flirt with me if you want. I don't mind. She glanced across the street as the rumble stopped. Kevin's car was now parked there. I have to go, though. Al's smile was nearly blinding, even with the ID mask on. He kissed the back of her hand again and let her go. Jen was pretty sure her face was stained perpetually red at this point. She pulled away and crossed the street to Kevin's car. She glanced back at Albraxix as she slid into the back seat. Chapter 7. Moving Forward. Your boy toy is wearing an ID mask. Jen rolled her eyes at Kevin. First, he's not my boy toy. Second, I knew that. How did you? Kevin pointed out his window. You blushing light? Jen glanced through the slightly tinted window of the back seat. Kevin was right. Al's cheeks were much brighter than they normally were. He turned and headed back inside. Jen shook her head. I need a smoothie. Drive. I'll explain on the way there. Kevin shook his head at her, but drove them to Mr. Smoothie regardless. Jen explained what she'd seen and been told as he drove, only pausing when they reached the Mr. Smoothie to order. I couldn't actually read their passports, but they all had the plumber symbol at the bottom. I'm assuming Magister Labyrinth cleared them. That would make sense. Kevin nodded, his hand going to the pocket he kept the badge in. So, Kevin, what do you know about these Apollonites? Gwen asked, and Kevin grinned. He knew that his experience off-world would prove vital to the team, and he was glad he could contribute something other than punching and criminal deals. Apollo 1 was declared an open system a few years back, so it's still relatively new. Monarchy over the planet, but it's peaceful. A lot of medical advancements come out of there. He paused to take a sip of his smoothie. Apollonites themselves are humanoid, but more energy-based than us. It's got something to do with their planet's solar radiation, but I didn't really pay that much attention. Jen sipped her smoothie contemplatively. How did you find this out? Kevin shrugged and looked for a moment like he wasn't going to answer the question. Then he sighed. When I first got out of the null void, I took a job as hired muscle for a courier service. The way he said it made both girls think that things they were transporting were less than legal. We were transporting a Galvan and some of her tech. She was really excited about the whole thing. I eventually just tuned her out. Jen nodded. It was easy to zone out when a Galvan got really excited about something and started babbling in science speak. Azimuth got annoyed when she did it to him. She frowned into her straw. You wouldn't happen to know where a specialist sits on the plumber rank, would you? Kevin shrugged, tossing his empty cup. As far as I know, it's a high rank, but able to work outside the regular sphere of command without too much hassle. Why? Apparently I'm a specialist. At least that's what Al's bodyguard called me. Gwen laughed. So we do have a ranking plumber, we just didn't know it. The redhead kept giggling. Kevin joined in after a moment. Gwen scowled and flipped off her cousin. She ignored them both, and her frown returned. Once they'd calmed down, Jen spoke again. One more question. What's an Abraxian emerald? Kevin raised an eyebrow. Pretty rare jewel. Not as useful as tadenite, but expensive. Comes from Abrax. The Abraxi claim to mine the most beautiful jewels in the universe. That's the high price point. They're not wrong, but none of it can be used as anything more than decoration. The emeralds are supposed to be the greenest thing in the known galaxy." Jen went bright red. Gwen raised an eyebrow. "Why the sudden interest in space jewelry?" Jen muttered something into her smoothie. "Didn't quite catch that." Al said my eyes looked like them, but brighter. Kevin laughed aloud. "Someone's got a crush," he teased. Gwen snorted lightly and Jen shot her a dirty look. She burst out laughing. "You have to admit, it's a little funny. You're going to school with a literal space prince who thinks you have eyes greener than the greenest jewel in the galaxy. It's cheesy." Jen grumbled and grouched into her smoothie, even as her cheeks went a darker red. The next few days were quiet. Almost too quiet. Kevin was putting the rust bucket back together. They had gotten the location of the stolen tech out of Argit without much of a fight once he realized who exactly the equipment actually belonged to, and he put two and two together about the Omnitrix. Gwen was excited because her older brother Ken was coming home for a week for spring break. Jen was excited too. Her eldest cousin was interesting in the most refreshingly human way. He was an engineering student at college a few towns away. He didn't know about the whole aliens are real thing, but he was always eager to help Jen with her latest engineering project. She'd been tinkering with small projects for a few years now. Grandpa Max liked to joke that it kept her too busy to cause trouble. She was even bugging Kevin about how he was fixing the rust bucket. She wanted to know how it was done. So needless to say, the Tennysons were looking forward to seeing Ken again. Then they got a phone call. Well, Gwen's parents did. Ken's car, the Awesome Mobile, had broken down in a small town called Santa Mira. Then nothing for 2 days. Jen's paranoia was on full alert. Even Julie seemed to notice something was wrong with her. She had to do something. Her cousin was missing and she was a superhero. She wasn't going to sit around and wait for the police who'd told them to wait. Not happening. There was only one thing in her way. "Come on, Kevin, he's my cousin." Kevin wiped his hands on an oily rag. "And that's not really my problem, is it? I don't even know you had another cousin." Jen rolled her eyes. "I have a few other cousins than Gwen." Jen threw her hands in the air. "Fine. If you won't help me, I'll do it myself." She stormed into the shed next to the nearly fully restored rust bucket. Kevin snagged a soda out of the cooler he'd brought with him. "You're probably just in Mexico or LA. You're overreacting here." Jen rolled a very pretty bike out of the shed and Kevin frowned. "Where'd that come from?" "Grandpa Max had been building it for me for a few years. Technically, I'm not legal to drive yet, but that's never stopped me before. Also, he's not like that. We got a call that he broke down in a town nearby called Santa Mira, then nothing. It's been 2 days. The police say we have to wait to even file a missing persons report for another 24 hours. I'm not waiting." Kevin shook his head as Jen zipped up her jacket. "I still don't see how this is our problem." "Because he's my brother?" Kevin turned and looked at Gwen, who had just arrived. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "Put the bike away, Jen. We're taking the car." Jen quickly stowed the bike, making a mental note to make anything she ever wanted from Kevin about Gwen somehow. It seemed to be the magic button with him. Which was still a little weird, especially since they hadn't even been on a real date.